Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests and esteemed panelists, both in person and those joining us virtually, a very, very warm welcome to all of you. My name is Shireen Pandita. I'm an associate fellow here at TERI, and also I'm very pleased to be your MC for today's session. This pivotal session at the 24th edition of the World Sustainable Development Summit, which is India's primary platform for shaping the discourse on sustainability and climate action, is important, right? With just 5 years left to achieve the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, the urgency to bridge the $4 trillion annual financial gap for developing nations has never been more greater. While innovative financial instruments like blended finance, sustainability-linked bonds, and green budgeting are gaining momentum, real progress requires bold reforms, collaborative actions, and strategic investments. To delve into these critical issues, we have an exceptional panel of experts who will help us navigate the complexities of climate finance, policy reforms, and investment alignment with sustainable development goals. With this, I would like to invite our panelists for today's session to the dais. I would start with His Excellency Mr. Yutaka Matsuzawa, who is the Vice Minister for Global Environment Affairs, Japan. I'd request the audience to please give him a round of applause. And please continue with the applause as I'm calling out our second guest for today's session. Ms. Priya Shankar, India Director, Climate and Environmental Program, Bloomberg Philanthropies. We have Dr. Sujata Gupta, Director, Asian Development Bank with us. We also have Mr. Manish Chourasia, COO, Tata Capital Limited. Dr. Jennie Dodson, Senior Director, World Bank Council for Sustainable Development. Mr. Shankar Chakraborti, Group CEO, Acuité Group. Clapping. We'll have some really nice discussions today. I want all of you to keep clapping for them. And last but not the least, it will be Ms. Heeta Lakhani, Founder and Director of the ClimAct Foundation. I beg your pardon, the last panelist would be Ms. Ilka Hurt, Deputy Director General for International Policy, Federal Ministry for the Environment, Germany. And the panelist is important, but the moderator is equally important. To guide today's discussion, I'm delighted to introduce our chair for this session, a stalwart in international diplomacy and sustainability, His Excellency Ambassador Manjeev Singh Puri, distinguished fellow at TERI with his extensive experience in global climate negotiation and financial governance. He brings invaluable insights into how we can mobilize resources and strengthen public finance mechanisms. I welcome you, sir. Please come to the dais. And before we begin, may I request all the dignitaries to come together for a photo op. If you can come forward for a photo op, please. No.
Please come ahead of this.
Thank you. I request the dignitaries to kindly take their seats, please. With this, I would request my AV team to play a small video that would set the tone for the session.
With just 5 years left to achieve the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, the financing challenge has reached a critical juncture. The United Nations Financing for Sustainable Development Report 2024 reveals a staggering annual financing gap of $4 trillion for developing nations, with trillions more needed for climate adaptation and mitigation by 2030. Despite this pressing need, financial flows remain misaligned with sustainability goals, leaving the most vulnerable populations at risk of being left behind. The current international financial architecture must undergo transformative reforms. Innovative solutions like blended finance, sustainability-linked bonds, and climate-responsive fiscal policies are already showing promise. South-South cooperation, green budgeting, and integrating the Sustainable Development Goals into public and private finance processes offer significant opportunities to bridge the financing gap. This session will tackle critical questions. How can fiscal policies align better with the SDGs? What incentives can drive private sector investments towards sustainability? And what reforms are essential to making financial systems work for climate action? Bridging the financing gap requires collective action and collaboration across governments, multilateral institutions, the private sector, and civil society. Together, we can mobilize the resources needed to achieve climate action and sustainable development, ensuring that no one is left behind. Join us as we discuss actionable strategies to close the financing gap and deliver a more sustainable and equitable future.
I let Ambassador Puri to take it forward. There's somebody's phone we have got. If someone realizes their phone is lost, please come forward and take it. It will be in the front row. With this, I'd request Ambassador Puri to take the session forward.
Hello. Hello. Thank you very much, Shireen, and thank you very much for this lovely introduction, and thank you to all of you. Money matters. It matters to all of us, isn't it? Matters to all of you here. But you know, this hall is reminding me of my school classes. The class was absolutely full and no one was in the front rows. So if any of you feel like coming forward, please come. The venerables like me will come and sit at the back. They'll be quite comfortable. Choice is entirely yours. We will make this an interactive session. I understand we are running half an hour late and there is lunch after that. But ladies and gentlemen, fellow members of the panel, I want us to take advantage of what is perhaps the critical thing for our being able to do things, the question of money, finance, we can use whatever, to reach out to all these young minds, because in the end of the day, it's about convincing the future generations in your, my, and our countries. And it's their future. Of course, it's ours too. And that's important. So I want to thank you all for coming here today. And I know, let's start with the very beginning. Let's not go into Copenhagen and how the $100 billion came about. That's for the book that Mr. Rashmi, who's just left, and I will write, because we were sitting on the table with President Obama. But let's talk about the absolute recent one, the COP at Baku. What did we start off with? We started off with, and the COP itself noted, that the need is trillions. And we ended up with 300 billion. I understand disappointment. My country's delegation was in the forefront of making it. And yesterday, when we had the inaugural session, our minister, as well as the honorable ministers from Brazil and the Prime Minister from Guyana, all of them underlined that let us beware that we don't end up in a cycle of underfunded climate action across the world. We all understand the importance of money, and money, in fact, also helps you get technology, helps you do regulations, does a lot of things, and the needs are tremendous. But we also need to recognize realities. And we have here today with us a fantastic panel. I want to take just a minute, and of course, Shireen has introduced them, but I want to tell you a little bit about the panelists. We have very senior people from Japan and Germany, in a sense, standing here before you, and I hope to show to you the commitment of their countries, their people, on continuously being in the forefront of climate action, including in this matter that matters, which is that of money. Then we have people from multilateral agencies, the Asian Development Bank, the World Bank, etc. Again, to see what they have to say. And we have Philanthropies, thank you very much. But we also have, very importantly, people from the corporate world. You know, much as we can talk in terms of this entire business of grants, money coming in terms of checks, etc., at the end of the day, in the largest manner possible, it is the private sector which will have to come to fore. And the private sector will not only have to do it, it will need to be financed. And I'm happy to see the Tatas represented with Manish, who's an old friend of mine and co-collaborator and all this. But we also have someone who represents the beginning of this entire thing of how private capital gets attracted, the question of ratings, the question of doing something in the area of ESG, which is perhaps not such a great word in today's world. But beyond all of this, I want to tell each and every one of you, please listen to what they have to say, internalize all of this, and use this opportunity to ask them questions, to clarify things in your mind. We call this the World Sustainable Development Summit. Why? Because TERI is perhaps the only large, huge body in the entire developing world. In any case, perhaps the first. TERI is 50 years old. Perhaps not many of you knew that. Which is focused on the area of sustainability. We were proud to have Dr. Pachauri as the first DG of TERI. He was the president of IPCC when the IPCC got the Nobel. We're very proud of all this. But the developing world matters. The global south is the key to further action along, and I want to underline this, the developed world, neither whose historic responsibilities should be allowed to be diminished, nor whose need for taking action needs to be underplayed by any way. So I won't say much more. It was only by way of introducing all of this. I'm going to ask all the panelists to speak for about 5 to 6 minutes, not more than that. And then we'll have about 15, 20 minutes of questions and answers. So be ready for all of that. We are honored to have His Excellency, the Vice Minister from Japan. Sir, given the fact that we are a country where hierarchy, venerability matters, may I ask you to first take the floor? You have 5 to 6 minutes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you giving me a first speaker role. And I'd like to talk about the financial issues from the government viewpoint. But first, money matters, of course, but you know, science matters, and well-being of individuals matters every day, every week, I think. And to fulfill the financial gap, I think the domestic policy and international cooperation, both approach, domestic approach and international approach is really relevant. And in Japan, recently we submitted the next NDC to UNFCCC already last month. And domestically, we developed the Green Transformation National Strategy, which provides the some confidence to our private players, including consumers. We set the milestone at 2035 and 2040 toward the net zero by 2050. We will commit to the linear reduction of our greenhouse gas emissions. We pursue the linear emission reduction by net zero by 2050. And regarding international approach, we see a huge uncertainty or difficulty in global policy, but still G7, G20 has a very, very important role to talk about everything, including finance, including sustainable development goals, etc. And to Japan, it is very important to the co-work with Asian Development Bank and other multilateral development banks to support or to cooperate the developing partners to address the climate and other sustainable development goals. And regarding the regulation side, emission trading schemes for greenhouse gas emission reduction, namely carbon credit trading system. It's a very effective to reform or to change the behavior of private sectors. They can consider, they can have the predictability toward the emission reduction. Emission reduction ensure the economic benefit of the private sector. So regulation scheme such as emission trading schemes is very effective. And recently, we have a disclosure framework, financial disclosure framework, such as TCFD and TNFD. And I think our colleagues, Jennie, Dodson, WBCSD, recently is developing global circularity protocol. So climate, biodiversity, and resource efficiency, those three issues, now we will have the something like a framework for disclosing the performance of private sector. That's another issues. And finally, at COP29, we reached the agreement on the Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. Article 6 provides the international carbon credit trading. So we can work internationally to reduce greenhouse gas emissions very effectively. Thank you.
Your Excellency, thank you very much. Yes, thank you very much. I want you to clap for a variety of reasons. Not only underlying the continued commitment of Japan, but to take concrete action in light of what is available today. So the whole idea of bringing in the private sector disclosures, and I particularly liked your willingness to try and see that market mechanisms also take a place. Thank you, Your Excellency, deeply appreciated. Thank you, we're very happy. We are the 5th largest economy, we'll become the 3rd. But there are still 2 ahead of us, the Japanese and the Germans. So Ilke, I'm afraid, let's see what the wallet has to offer us here.
Yeah, thank you, Ambassador, for introducing me in such a charming way. And hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and an honor to be speaking here. To start maybe with what we discussed before this meeting here, Ambassador, as you all know, Germany is right now in the process of finding a new government. So we've had elections 12 days ago, and as it is the good tradition in Germany, nobody gets the absolute majority, but it's usually the case that 2 or even more parties have to find compromise to agree on a coalition. And this is what is being done right now in Germany. I'm very happy to say that we will be able to have a stable government because we have 2 center parties discussing this coalition agreement. And this is not something I would have said some months or years ago, but it's important to say now because on one hand, we've had a strengthening of the extreme right forces in Germany, 20%. That is, for me, really a big shock and an embarrassment for a country that was responsible for the Holocaust. So I still have to say this here. And on the same hand, because we're not a global political forum, but we're talking about climate action and finance, it's also dangerous, of course, for everything we tend to do in climate action. So the new government will, of course, have to find a way in order to integrate people who voted for the extreme right, who feel maybe left out of discussions, and find ways to get them on board again in order to have also strong standing on sustainability and climate action again. So this will be one important task, in my opinion, for the new government. But as you all know, and you said money comes first, it's the same for the new German government. Unfortunately, right now, we hear very little about climate finance right now. The discussions are going on that we want to increase our budget, we have to, but right now it's especially for defense matters, because as you know, the geopolitical situation has become quite challenging for all of Europe and Germany in the center of it. So of course, this is one priority. And what is my task or our task as ministries and Minister for the Environment is to make sure that a fair share, an important share, will also be dedicated to climate action and biodiversity finance, because we all know what is needed. You said what was agreed at the NCQG. Last year, we also had our biodiversity conferences, CBD, COP, and Cali, and we also know what is needed there. And you know that Germany has always been very committed to pay its fair share. We have had committed with the last government to commit €6 billion to climate finance, and out of this 1.5 billion euro to biodiversity finance, and until 2025, and we reached that goal. And of course, it will be our task to see that we will also do so in the future and have a good amount of our budget dedicated to climate finance. So this is really something that is a large priority for my work these next months, and I'm committed to do so. And maybe to say some more words about what we also think, I mean, what we're doing right now, and to get away from the global political scale. I think that, of course, we are aiming to use the public resources that we have, such as our International Climate Initiative, catalytically to maximize impact, because we know, and that has been said by His Excellency, the Japanese Vice Minister, that public finance, of course, will not be enough, and we do need to get the private sector on board to have matters of blended finance and new ideas in order to really have the businesses see the business case, actually. So this is something we all have to work on. And we're also committed, or we also think and are convinced that the donor base should be broadened, actually. So it cannot, I mean, it's so much money that is needed. And of course, we are committed to continue, but we do think that some things have also shifted in the world. Some countries have become very rich over the course of the years, and we do think that we have to think about broadening the donor base as well. So something to be said here. Of course, we have a long track for to support multilateral finance mechanisms, and we very much believe in them, such as the GCF, but also the Adaptation Fund, the GEF, and the Global Biodiversity Framework Fund. And together with our partners, for example, we really strongly advocated that the GBFF would offer MDBs and IFIs the opportunity to increase participation in the GEF portfolio, as well as providing additional finance through loans and blended finance, as I already said. And then let me lastly also maybe come to the MDB reform, because Germany is actively engaged in the reform of the multilateral development banks. And we think that with this reform, we agreed to make global public goods, including, of course, climate and biodiversity, part of the MDB's mandate. We are convinced that this will influence strategies and lending decisions in countries. And now, besides the reform of the World Bank, as a practical example, Germany supports the ambition of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, the EBRD, to become not only a climate but also a nature financing bank. We think this is very important and an important step. Therefore, we financially support a new window under the High Impact Partnership on Climate Action, the so-called HIPCA, dedicated to nature especially. And we think that with blended finance, once again, and de-risking, we can leverage public funds and also foster nature-positive investment opportunities for business. And Japan has already mentioned the TNFD, the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures. And I think this is a very important instrument, because we know that in the EU almost 3/4 of non-financial companies are dependent on at least one ecosystem service. And this is why nature really has and must be integrated into investment and financial decisions, as well as in business models. So the TNFD really helps in this regard, and we are happy to be a financial supporter of this, and we really hope that even more countries will adopt TNFD standards. So thanks a lot for listening to me, and please stay tuned with us, because we in Germany, because we have interesting weeks ahead of us. But Ambassador, you also said that we need the youth on board and civil society, and I can assure you it's very alive in Germany. We've had many people on the streets before the elections, and many young people, even though, of course, they are also worried on security and jobs and economic growth, but they still keep up the fight for climate action and nature protection, because they know that it's their future at stake. So we don't forget about this. Thank you so much.
Ilke, thank you very much. I think that's extremely important, not only because you appreciated the way she spoke, but what she underlined, the substance. There is politics, and let's understand there's national security. And so therefore, the challenges before European countries are something that we sitting here also need to be a little bit cognizant of. But Ilke, what really worries me is a degree in Europe, and your country is the leader, of a kind of fatigue with sustainability and climate action. I want to tell you, before we walked in, Ilke, she's a young lady. She said that when she was even younger, her mother carried her on the shoulders when the Greens were coming to power. And the Greens in Germany are the reason for all of us, the green revolution in the world. So we wish you all the power. As a former bureaucrat, we don't like the idea of bureaucrats being committed, but I like bureaucrats being committed to sustainability. All powers to your elbows. Ilke, I also want to thank you very much for the segue to the next speaker. You used this wonderful expression, blended, and you also said de-risking. So Priya, please get ready. Why am I going to ask you to speak right now? Of course, because of this segue, but also because you stand at the very top of our leaderboard. We're very proud that Bloomberg's Philanthropies has been a big sponsor for us. But I also want to tell you something else about where all this comes from. I don't know what will happen now with the changes in the United States, but the last time this happened, Mr. Bloomberg stepped up and, as people say, literally took over what the United States government had said would be its responsibilities. Priya, I'm not wanting to put all that load on your shoulders, but we want to hear what Philanthropies have to say, because the gap really needs to be bridged.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Puri. And on behalf of Bloomberg Philanthropies, I'd also like to thank Dr. Vibha Dhawan and our partners here at TERI for convening the World Sustainable Development Summit. And maybe before I get to the substance of the topic we're at today on climate finance, I don't want to dwell too much on US politics, but I do want to respond to what you said and say that our founder, Mike Bloomberg, UN Special Envoy for Climate Ambition and Solutions, who you heard from earlier today in a video address, has announced again that he will be stepping up to help fill the gap left by the US in terms of its contributions to the multilateral processes at UNFCCC. And it will also be supporting efforts with the America is All-In initiative to mobilize subnational, private, and other actors across the US on their climate commitments. This was an announcement made a few weeks ago, so this is something that I'll kick off with, but I will now get to the topic at hand, which is why we're here to discuss climate finance. We all know that we're already feeling the impacts of climate change. And our mission at Bloomberg Philanthropies is to ensure better and longer lives for the greatest number of people. And climate finance is critical to that work, as you outlined, Ambassador Puri. It's about the lives and the well-being of people fundamentally as well. 2024 was the hottest year on record, and we've heard from multiple speakers on the heat waves, the flooding, the extreme weather events that everyone is starting to experience. And we also know that the kind of investment needed for the climate transition is huge and challenging, the trillions. But despite the challenges, it also presents immense opportunities. According to the World Bank, for every dollar that we invest in transitioning to a cleaner economy, on average, it would bring $4 in return. So it's a huge opportunity for sustainable development. India, with its strong policies and strong renewable energy targets, has been relatively successful in attracting investment for climate and renewable energy. According to a ranking called Climate Scope, done by my colleagues at Bloomberg New Energy Finance, it has scored top for 2 years in a row now. So that's fantastic to see. But even India, which has been relatively successful, needs at least 3 times more climate finance to meet its existing climate goals, according to the Climate Policy Initiative. And this gap is much stronger in the rest of the developing and emerging world. Finance is just not flowing to the degree that it's needed for clean energy investment, for climate resilience, for a variety of different areas. And the majority of this will need to be filled by governments and the private sector. And it was great to hear from Vice Ministers of Japan and Ms. Hurt from Germany to hear about the commitments their governments are making to this space. And the role we play at Philanthropy, though, will be really to facilitate and enable partnerships to help support this work. The bulk needs to come from the private sector and government. But this year's theme of the World Sustainable Development Summit around partnerships, this is really where Philanthropy would like to sort of convene and facilitate and enable the partnerships needed to address this type of action. And I'd like to share a few examples of the partnerships that we support here in India that are helping bring in climate finance for action. And the first is with work that we're doing with TERI and partnership with the Ministry of Environment in support of the National Clean Air Program. As part of that, we have supported detailed project preparation in Uttar Pradesh for the state's clean air program that the TERI team has done that has led to an investment from the World Bank that will have climate and health co-benefits. And we're supporting similar work in the state of Haryana, and I'd really like to thank the TERI team for the excellent work in really facilitating and driving this. Another example is from the work that we have done. We have Sujata here on the panel, sorry, on the other side, with the Asian Development Bank and Goldman Sachs, a blended finance facility that we set up together with these partners called the Climate and Innovation and Development Fund, as part of which we've supported 7 projects across India and Vietnam on topics as varied as electric buses and battery storage systems that will help bring investment from the private sector into these initiatives and get them off the ground. A final example I'd like to share is with work that we're supporting with the Climate Policy Institute, CPI, on the India Clean Energy Facility, through which we've supported in the last year 15 small-scale, innovative clean energy initiatives with project preparation to help attract investment and scale. And these are not just clean energy projects, but bring lots of other benefits, such as livelihoods for rural women. And because we think that India has so much to share in terms of its incredible successes with solar energy and clean energy development, we're partnering with the International Solar Alliance to help mobilize investment into solar energy globally, and on initiatives such as the Solar X Challenge, which is also around promoting innovative solar and new technologies. We've heard this, but we really need a step change in finance, and it needs to come from all sources, from the government, from the private sector, from domestic sources, from international sources, in blended and innovative mechanisms, but really from everywhere. I think it's not a debate of this or that. It just all needs to come, and it all needs to grow, and we all need to work together. And that kind of collaboration and partnership will be really core to driving that step change that we need. And forums such as this, WSDS that TERI is hosting, bringing together different stakeholders from the private sector, from government, from multilateral banks, can really go a long way in helping make that happen and facilitate that. So thank you.
Priya, thank you very much. Of course, a very big thank you for what Bloomberg and Mr. Bloomberg are doing. But I want to really tell you, I was very impressed with what you said in terms of what you are doing for India. However, let me leave a thought with you. While you mentioned the largest names in US equity markets being your partners here in India, I'm afraid what we are reading and what we are seeing is disconcerting. The very names that you took have decided to remove the label green from whatever their offerings may have or may not have been. This by itself is disconcerting. And this is something that we hope to count on your power, your personal, your organizations and everyone, because at the end of the day, we are vulnerable. But should I say the United States is not vulnerable? No, that's not true either. The globe is vulnerable, and we all need to come together. So thank you very much. And now, ladies and gentlemen, before I'm accused of a DEI bias, I'm going to turn to somebody who can take the money, make it manifold, and really do what everybody is hinting at. They're saying, government monies, we don't know, but private sector, what can we do about it? And I want to turn to my dear friend Manish, who heads the Tata's entire area of action in terms of capital in the green technologies, an old partner of mine, a friend on doing things. Manish, I want to talk to you about needs for developing countries, India as an example. What can be done about leveraging private capital, and can we think of some institutional mechanisms which can help us? The floor is yours.
Thank you, Ambassador. It's an honor to be part of this very interesting panel discussion and a topic which is so important globally. We spoke about 4 trillion gap. Now 4 trillion actually in isolation looks quite big. But actually if you compare this with global savings, which I think plus minus a few $1 trillion should be about $25 trillion. Actually this amount is not a very big amount. Naturally, all these savings are actually part of the developed world. And that's why global cooperation is so important. The fund flow from the developed countries to developing countries is so important. And of course, a lot of efforts are going on to ensure that the 300 billion becomes a much bigger figure. But the good news is that when we talk about climate action, and when we break this into various segments where funding is required, we find that at least 65 to 70% of the funding is in those segments where there's a business case. Today, if you take segments like solar, wind, energy storage, electric vehicles, all these segments are in the money, where if the private sector participates and funds, they make a good return on investment. So what we are talking about is how can we have enabling policies, enabling regulations, so that private sector actually starts investing in this sector. As was mentioned, we have seen good progress in India, but actually there's a room for a significant more improvement. If some of the issues we are able to resolve, which are around land acquisition, which are around power transmission, which are around creating a manufacturing ecosystem, then I think we can solve at least 70% of the problem and ensure that private sector comes in by itself without any great push in terms of requirement for viability gap funding. What we are really talking about is the balance 30%. And balance 30% would be in very important areas, covering new technologies like green hydrogen, carbon capture and storage, maybe funding for adaptation, which is so important. Like say, cold chain infrastructure or climate resistant seeds or maybe, micro irrigation. Now for all these segments, again, the good news is that we have seen quantum growth in the technology. And we have seen pockets where these technologies are doing quite well. The issue is how do we bring in the behavioral change? And for this, I think there are 3 things which are extremely important. First is development of carbon markets. And I think globally, a lot of progress is happening there. If we can find a way to compensate those projects which don't generate revenues by giving them revenues through generation of carbon credits, I think that can make a huge difference. Today, if you take some projects like say afforestation, reforestation, or say mangrove cultivation, those projects are extremely important, but they don't generate any revenue. But actually they can generate a huge amount of revenue if there's a carbon budget and if there's an obligation on those industries which are emitting a lot of carbon to purchase those carbon credits, then I think it can have a significant impact. I think this is something where progress is happening internationally. And this is one area which needs to develop for a quantum leap to happen. Apart from this, I think the way financing is happening, today while we evaluate credit risk, we evaluate a lot of other risk, but we don't evaluate the ESG risk in a transaction in a systematic manner. So today if central bank across the world make climate risk and ESG risk as an integral part of enterprise risk assessment, I think that will make the financial institutions very conscious, like banks and non-banking finance companies. They will also gain significantly because today when the banks take security, sometimes these are in those regions where security can be jeopardized because of climate change. And plus, they will improve their credit analysis by understanding what can go wrong in terms of climate change, and their money could be at risk. Similarly, a lot of insurance companies will benefit. So I think that if one change can happen across the world, it will have a huge impact. But for all this to happen, first of all, we have to define what is green. So what is the taxonomy? There again, in the pockets of the world, progress has happened. But I guess then there has to be international collaboration where people are clear what is green and what is not green, so that we also avoid the risk of greenwashing. Apart from this, one very important area is to measure. The fact of the world is we don't monitor something which we don't measure. So we need regulations around disclosures. And again, in pockets and also in India, we have a good improvement which has happened in terms of disclosures. In India, SEBI has come out with this business responsibility reporting and sustainability reporting. I think that is something which is now confined to very few corporates, maybe around 500 to 1,000 corporates. That needs to be mainstreamed across MSMEs as well. So once corporates are measuring what they are emitting, I think there will be more responsibility. I think these are some of the changes. Plus, then we have to be clear that when we talk about huge amount of money, domestic savings will not be enough. So one will have to rely on the international capital. There, I think if we can have some policies around the hedging, today when the enterprises borrow, while the interest rate sometimes looks very low, but after hedging, the interest rates become very high. And a lot of companies then have this greed of doing some kind of hedging which is not a perfect hedging. where they take some kind of a currency risk, and in bad times it creates a huge problem. So if something can be done about it, I think that will lead to a quantum leap. Some of these actions can actually have a lot of impact. Thank you so much.
Manish, thank you very much. You know, my idea of asking him to speak at this stage was to infuse in everyone the ideas that we have to look for solutions. And thank you, Manish, for talking about solutions, not just in a small manner, but for a large economy like India's, the 5th largest economy. What can be done? So please look at what he said. One, try and understand what we can do. What are the policy frameworks that we can do? Can we do some things internationally? We both at one point really felt and still feel very strongly that one of the areas that the world can do something about is to try and build mechanisms by which we can de-risk and do something at least on the issue of hedging, which is a straightforward manner. But thank you, Manish, this was particularly important and very useful, that there are ways forward. And ways forward have to be found, not just we lament and we feel bad. That's not the answer. We have to work forward on it. I want to take this opportunity to welcome in our midst His Excellency, the Minister of Environment of Nepal. Sir, thank you very much for being here. You honor us by your presence. Thank you very much to all of you. So Manish, let's now turn to someone who in our region is responsible for even creating this atmosphere, finding solutions quite apart from perhaps being able to write a check for a certain amount of what can happen. I want to ask Dr. Sujata to now speak, but I want to also tell you something, that we are particularly honored at TERI to have her here with us. Sujata almost can claim to be one of the founding members of TERI. Thank you very much, Sujata, for bringing that to my attention. A relationship which now goes back to what, about 40 odd years, something like that. We are very proud that it's people like her, their achievements, which reflect glory on us as a lovely organization of the Global South. Sujata, we're very proud to have you here, but we want to hear what the Asian Development Bank and His Excellency mentioned to you that that's obviously an area. We think it's ours. What is it that you can do, including in today's challenged environment? The floor is yours.
So thank you very much for a very, very warm welcome, Ambassador Puri, and a very good afternoon to everyone over here. I'd like to start off by thanking the organizers for inviting Asian Development Bank to join this. And ADB is very happy to partner with TERI in this flagship event, WSDS. When I was at TERI, it was called DSDS. It was the Delhi Sustainable Development Summit. So it's good to hear that it's going global. So thank you for having us here, and we are very happy to be partnering with ADB, with TERI. I've already changed sides, as you can see. So I'll focus on bridging the gap in climate finance, rather than looking at both climate and sustainable development, and discussing it more from the perspective of developing countries. Now, developing countries, for obvious reasons, tend to focus on other challenges that they are facing. Poverty alleviation, food security, water, health, employment generation. So clearly, something like climate change is not first on their agenda. So therefore, to help public finance and fiscal policies to be aligned towards regional or global public goods, it is necessary that, I'll just call them additional costs of these actions, are covered by new, additional, and concessional resources. Very sorry to disappoint you, Ambassador Puri. I'm going to talk about Copenhagen. You said not to talk about the 100 billion, but I just want to raise it here that despite the fact it was done in 2009 and it was to be delivered by 2020, we are yet to deliver it. We are still trying to define, Manish, you spoke about taxonomy. What exactly is climate finance? So it's rather slowly that we are moving on this. And it is in this context I wanted to mention 2009, you know. So, in fact, this goal should have increased over time, and we are yet to achieve it. So, in this scenario, developing countries' policies will steer towards climate action if there is some direct benefit. Or there is an incentive, or there is a threat. So again, it's not the natural course for developing economies to go down this path. And in the case of India, just to illustrate the point, the government has incentivized renewable energy development and has set itself very ambitious targets, like having 50% capacity by 2030 coming from renewable energy, 500 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity by 2030. But it has done this keeping in mind energy security, keeping in mind the cost of energy. So again, there is a direct benefit for the country, and hence it is investing and having policies that support this. So, clean air. I mean, it's a big issue in New Delhi now, so that's where we are going. So the Asian Development Bank has also prioritized combating climate change, and we have declared ourselves to be the climate change bank for the Asia and Pacific region, and also set ourselves a target of doing 100 billion over the time period 2090 to 2030. I have an ex-colleague sitting here who was responsible for this target. She will kill me if I mention the name, so I don't. But ADB will also focus on doubling its investments in adaptation. So it's not only that mitigation that we are looking at, ensuring access to clean energy for all, and a just energy transition, ensuring that no one is left behind. And Manish, you spoke about incorporating risk. So in all of ADB's projects, we incorporate climate risk. The project has to show that it is climate proofed in a way, or what is its exposure to climate risk. So again, this is to help align projects towards the climate dimension. So we provide long-term, relatively concessional financing for climate action, as well as we mobilize grant or low-cost financing, lower cost than our concessional financing from other sources. And in this, ADB collaborates with various stakeholders to align financial flows towards low emission and climate resilient development. So this includes supporting climate action, promoting fiscal resilience by mobilizing concessional resources from, of course, the climate investment funds, the Green Climate Fund, Global Environment Facilities, amongst others, for projects in the developing member countries. We also work with other development partners. And here, His Excellency Matsuzawa-san mentioned, with ADB, we have what we call the JFJCM, Japan Fund for Joint Credit Mechanism. Now, this is actually a front runner, if you like. In the absence of carbon markets, Japan has invested in a trust fund where we are creating carbon markets or carbon credits. So from ADB's projects, we use financial support from JFJCM and in return, it gets repaid in carbon credits. So, it's really building this carbon market that we should have. We also provide avenues for other development partners to channel their funds into climate projects. And We work with, I think, a number of partners here. We have technical assistance, we have capacity building is provided to our developing member countries so that they are able to enhance awareness and knowledge about climate change and build this into the design of the project. And they are able to not only build this into the design of their project, but also in their policies and programs. So others have also mentioned that climate finance requirements are so large that sovereign investments alone cannot meet this. So again, it's very important to leverage private sector investments and into clean technologies and climate action. Again, being in India, we'll mention the case of India. India has done this very well through its PPP model and policy. So for example, India develops solar parks. The common infrastructure, the evacuation facilities are financed by the public sector. But the private capital for solar generation is invested by private companies. So this is an example where sovereign funds are leveraging private money into a sector where maybe those investments would not have taken place. So, and as we are dealing with emerging technologies, Manish, you spoke about the risk, right? There is a higher level of perceived and real risk because these are new technologies. So they are not, they don't fully have a support infrastructure often. They take some time to get assimilated into the system. And it's very important to de-risk. And what the private sector is doing, it's factoring in this risk, so the rate of return is lower. Not only is the private sector, but even the banks are factoring in this risk in new and emerging technologies. So the rate of return in these technologies is lower, and hence we need to have some de-risking mechanisms. ADB is looking to see how we can provide guarantees, sovereign guarantees. So through a sovereign guarantee on, say, a power purchase agreement, and here I don't speak so much in the context of India. Here the market is well developed, but in other economies where there is a lower level of confidence due to other uncertainties, an ADB guarantee on a PPA can substantially improve the rating of the project at a very low cost. So these are some sort of new instruments we are trying to develop. I know I've taken very long, but in conclusion, I'd just like to say there are 3 Ps that we have to look at. So one is partnerships. And again, we cannot tackle this problem without global support for DMCs. And everyone has a role to play. Bilaterals, multilaterals, philanthropies, everyone has to be in partnership. Then we require policies. Policies are not required only at the national level or the subnational level. They're also required at the international level. And again, I refer to what we are discussing at the COP. We seem to move very slowly. We have major players exiting agreements, etc. So, and the third P is private sector participation. Again, it has to be private sector globally as well as locally. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sujata. Thank you. You had an inherent right on this podium, and so the red light was blinking, but we looked the other way. But thank you very much.
I was representing 2 organizations.
Yes, you were, and we are very happy. But I want to tell you, I was particularly happy that you are looking at ways and means of doing de-risking. That by itself is important. You are looking at ways of accelerating action along all the 3 Ps that you mentioned. And that's important because people, especially in your region, count on you as leaders, as those who give ideas which we then in countries, including a large economy like India, can do. But your last P, Dr. Dodson, you're not going to escape. So look what she said, private sector, and then she underlined it by something completely different. not just in your country, but in the world. And so we want to know, what's the private sector doing? Priya just told us that one corporate has stepped up. What are the rest of them doing, and what is the World Business Council telling them to do?
Thank you so much, and I think this really builds on what Manish was saying and Sujata as well. Firstly, just let me say what a pleasure it is to be here. Also coming from Europe, I've been in the region for a few weeks, and it is wonderful to get out of that bubble and see the momentum and the positivity and solutions that are occurring here. So it's really fantastic to be here. I think also just to speak to one of the elephants in the room. We are not hearing from we work with 250 of the biggest global corporations in the world committed to sustainable development, responsible for a significant amount of global emissions through their own direct emissions and through their supply chains. Their strategy isn't changing. We might be seeing some differences in terms of language and visibility, but the strategy isn't changing. The cost of inaction that they see is much greater than the cost of action. And physical risks are one of the biggest challenges facing them in terms of supply chains and climate impacts going forward, but they're also seeing the opportunities. So I think just to say, I think this builds on, as I said, what Manish and Sujata were saying. We sort of know what needs to be done in order to scale investment. We know that if we get into specific sectors, if we look at the solutions that are available there, if we look at the differences between the current solutions and the clean solutions, and put in place the policies that tip the scales to make those new pathways more attractive, then investment scales, business takes action, businesses invest more, costs come down, market scale. We've seen that in India with solar. We've seen that with Vietnam with renewables. We've seen it in China, we've seen it in the UK, and in almost every case, the progress and the investment that's occurred has happened a lot faster than people expected. The ability to move fast is often much greater than we expect. And often we move faster than perhaps the infrastructure or the skills capability can keep up with, and though we come up against new challenges that need to be tackled. And so we last year, for the first time, did a report called the Business Breakthrough Barometer, which is really trying to get the sentiment for business on the pace of transition, what businesses are doing themselves, where they see the opportunity, but where they could go faster if they had the right enabling environment. And we're seeing businesses taking a lot of action themselves. They recognize that. They recognize the need to tackle their Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions, to work closer with their supply chain, with their suppliers. They're working across all of the different sectors that Manish was mentioning, so whether that's in energy or steel, cement, agriculture. But they do, there's two challenges. One, the business case, an investment case is not always there. And also the infrastructure isn't there, and that's some of it. That is physical infrastructure and capability infrastructure. So things that they were highlighting were demand mandates as really critical. Often we look at supply, but we really need to look at how do we build the market, build the demand for the new products and new solutions. Often the customers are just not willing to pay a premium, pay additional cost. And so that's absolutely critical. They're looking for price certainty, revenue guarantees. Very often it's difficult to get long-term offtake agreements, long-term price guarantees. When in a market where solutions are scaling and costs are coming down, customers are not willing to commit to prices. But also infrastructure development is critical, and skills capability, as I mentioned. And also they speak to the need for more collaboration between governments, major economies, and between the public and private sector on things like standards and certification and trade. And if this happens, our businesses say that they will invest more. I think the other thing I want to say is around collaboration as well between the public and private and financial sector. Because we heard that there's some areas where the investment case, the business case is not there at present, but also it's very difficult to get there. So that's things like adaptation and resilience, nature financing, agriculture and foods. And we've been doing some research on what is that gap, what is needed. And there is a real gap in the architecture at the moment for the public-private finance to come together and really problem solve and focus on solutions. Often it's separated, right? You know, the government's coming forward with the policy, businesses reacting. How do we create those spaces for the public-private finance to really come together, align onto the strategic direction and problem solve and move there faster? There's some interesting architecture emerging. I think things like country platforms, what Brazil is doing in terms of the investment platform there is really interesting, and how that's connecting into the real economy players to scale the project pipeline. And we need to create a lot more of those types of mechanisms. Our businesses are facing challenges in their supply chains. As I said, scope 3 is their real emissions reduction challenge now. And it's a challenge of, you know, who pays again? You know, that we need mechanisms to share the cost burden and to enable that connection between global business players and their entire value chains. And for things like that, we need high quality value chain data, so it's much easier to see where the emission hotspots are and get the investment to flow to where the suppliers are on the ground. And I think earlier we heard as well about corporate performance and accountability, or the ESG regulations, the reporting. A lot of our businesses, you know, they are not valued for investing in sustainability. There is a disconnect between the capital markets and the action that businesses are taking. So things like TNFD, things like ISSB, those reporting regulations are really critical, and making sure that that financial reporting and data is recognized in terms of business action. And also things that we've been talking about, like the circularity protocol, these types of standards and mechanisms that really encourage businesses to take further action. And I think finally, one thing to point out that's haven't mentioned here, but I've been hearing a lot about, and we need to really focus in on in terms of the financial sectors around insurance and insurance markets. We're already seeing challenges in some cases for it being difficult for people to get financing because of the physical risks and finding it challenging to get insurance or on the reinsurance market. And I think this is a space in which it's going to become even more critical as climate impacts grow, but it's also a space in which we can utilize getting the right type of financing flow as well to new solutions, to innovations. So I think bringing in the insurance industry to this finance discussions is really critical as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jennie. That was particularly important. Bridging the gap between the real market and the financial markets, the insurance and all of them. You know, we are also in the real world and we need to understand all of this. And that's important. But as you said, and as Manish also mentioned, businesses need to see a business sense in doing what it is. And are we working towards that? We must. I'm going to turn to Shankar. Here is somebody who's trying to tell business that it makes sense for them to say so. A company which has started ratings in this particular area now wants to do ESG ratings. So here is that, let me say, that little sort of lubricant which pushes you in that particular direction, and that's important. So we want to hear from you. What are you doing? And what is it that's the way forward, not only for the world, but for large economies like India in the developing world? Shankar.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you, TERI, for inviting me here. It's a privilege to come to Delhi, and nowhere else can be a better venue for an event but Delhi because of the air quality, if the topic is on climate change. I work for Acuité Ratings and Research. It's promoted by Government of India. But Acuité Ratings also is the promoter in turn of a company called ESG Risk AI. This is India's first ESG rating company. Now, when I am almost the last speaker, therefore I don't have to make too many points. Most of the points are already made. So let me try and tell you in the form of stories. Maybe that will be a better way of. So when I wanted to start ESG Risk AI in India, and I did a survey of potential buyers and investors and asked them, what do you think about ESG ratings? I showed them what we can do, what kind of data is available and stuff. And almost all of them told me that you are wasting your time. This is, there's no point in trying to do this. Indian corporates are not evolved enough. I'm not using the unsavory words that they used for Indian corporates, but largely I was told that, you know, it's not going to work. And I was down for a few days, and then somebody told me that, you know, you have an Apple moment here. If people would have asked to shift from Nokia to Apple in the early days, before the product was visible, most people would have probably not have done it. And since I am able to do it from internal resources and not going to raise funds and others, maybe it is a risk that was worth taking. Why I felt that we should double down on this was very personal. India is a very unique country. It's heavily dependent on agriculture. We have come a long way in terms of self-sustenance in terms of agricultural production, but all that can go away due to climate change. You know, you have, it's also surrounded by very by itself, India is a very population heavy country, but it is also surrounded by population heavy countries, long coastlines, and climate risk can cause disasters, which a lot of other countries may look at it from a distance for a while, but India will have to bear the brunt very, very early. So the next question was that what do we do? What do I do in terms of bringing a change? I think great people have said that you can only improve what you can measure. So we thought that measuring the risk itself could be the first step, so that can be the basis of other people to improve. Now this measurement part is very tricky. You know, how do you measure something so abstract, something that requires so much of science? I was on the board of Indian Oil Corporation, and there was this investment that was happening at the time to move from BS4 fuel to BS6 fuel. And it required a few $1 billion of investments, and when we were expected to approve that proposal, somebody in the board asked this question, what is the ROI? Now, how do you do this ROI? You have to change the your entire plant because it has to produce a certain kind of fuel. After a certain date, you will not be able to sell your fuel unless it is up to the mark. And you then you don't have any established mechanism of figuring out what would be the ROI, because you are not going to be able to charge prices which is higher than what you are charging today. People don't care whether the fuel is cleaner or not. So we actually, Indian Oil actually did a study. They collected blood samples from, it was the fuel was first launched in Delhi NCR region even before the deadline was there, 3 months before. So for 6 months before that, Indian Oil collected blood samples from thousands of people in the NCR region, and immediately after the launch, blood sample from a similar kind of sample was collected after 3 months. And it is such an amazing study, not spoken about in the media, not spoken about anywhere, but actually all the markers which causes cancer and stuff like that came down significantly in 3 months. So this is something that probably the corporates needs to do. I understand that I have, but I would like to make a few more points. One, I think I would like to make a point about the need for a development finance organizations. India does not have too many development finance organizations left. ICCI, IDBI, all of them have got converted. SIDBI has a very specific focus on small and medium-sized enterprises. I think it is time that we think of developing a India-focused, India-specific bank capitalized by Indian money. Of course, there could be foreign capital as well. But today we need to look at a development finance mechanism within India because India needs about $170 billion per year in this area. It requires development of credit underwriting models, tools,
structuring of instruments. So I think I think a green bank of India, so to say, could make a lot of difference here.
Thank you, Shankar. Thank you very much. That was important. And I hope some of you heard what he said in terms of the way the world perceives some of these things. But you know, Shankar, you just said something very important. And that is the question of understanding at an individual level that climate change is not just something that's cost me in my wallet. Something that we may have seen in the great elections of November 2024, where many people said, oh wow, this is something big for the big companies, but it's costing me at the wallets. But the fact that there will be individual benefits and there are individual costs, and perhaps we need to move these individual costs to our society, take it on, economies of scale will turn to us. Thank you very much. Heeta, I took advantage of you because you are home. We are delighted to have another TERI-ite, as we call them. Great, absolutely. She was the youth icon at the 2015 COP, somebody who leads in terms of what people can do. And frankly, let me tell you, you heard Shankar, at the end of the day, if people realize that this will hurt them if they didn't take action, if they recognize their own vulnerabilities, politics will ensure that you take action. Heeta, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you. First, what an honor and delight it is to be back on home turf at the WSDS. As Ambassador Puri mentioned, I am an outcome of TERI University many years ago now, but it is always a delight and honor and a pleasure to be here, not just here today, but among such an esteemed panel. It seems like I'm sort of the oddball, you know. I don't hold the purse strings. I don't work on climate finance. I don't give money. I happen to be on the receiving end of the things. And I think that is the spectrum that we need to look at when we talk about finance. Before we get into anything, I run an organization known as the ClimAct Initiative, and we're a bridge builder between climate education, leadership, and action, and slowly getting into policy and research. In the words of the UNFCCC, we come under ACE, which is Action for Climate Empowerment, which is basically Article 12 of the Paris Agreement, or Article 6 of the UNFCCC Convention. So even before the Paris Agreement was conceived in 2015, Article 6 of the Convention spoke about the need for education, training, public participation, public awareness, access to resources. And that's where we step in. As we started building the ClimAct initiative, and this came, basically it came out of a passion project, right? It came out of something that I was doing because I realized the more I worked with youth internationally on the UN climate negotiation process, there were very few young Indians who were part of that process, understanding what it meant, being part of the advocacy, being part of, you know, making change at the negotiations internationally. There were very few young people in general, but if you counted young Indians, back in 2015, 2016, 2017, while there were youth at COPs, when you go beyond COPs, so youth who had access to actually attend the negotiations, access to be part of these discussions on a regular basis, not from a COP to COP point of view, you could count them on the fingers of one hand. And this is where we talk about gap, right? This is where there is a gap in finance to ensure that youth, and not just young people, right? The most vulnerable communities have the access to be in spaces where decisions about their future are being made. And the panel has mentioned multiple times, right? This is, we're leaving behind a planet for the generations of the future. Young people are stepping up. You see them on the streets, you see them everywhere nowadays, you've seen them on social media. But beyond that, what I think we need to realize is that young people are not just there as activists. We are here as experts, we are here as policymakers, we are here as decision makers, we are here as researchers, as entrepreneurs, as business holders, and as social enterprise leaders. So I think we need to stop thinking of the vulnerable communities, or young people, or women, or gender, or agriculture, or farmers as a separate section that needs to be looked at and worked at and needs to be supported. I think the narrative needs to flip. It needs to flip in a way where we're given the power to actually make decisions, because, as you rightfully said, it is our future. And I think if it is our future, we need to be making the decisions for it. Now that, you know, all said and done, We've spoken a lot of things, and I think the insights that have come out of this panel are absolutely brilliant. And it is wonderful to see the amount of work, the effort, and the intent that is going into making this transformative change. But like someone mentioned, we're in bubbles. And all of us here are in a very large bubble of our own. So if we use these languages of blended finance, if we use these jargons, these sort of, the sort of languages that we've all used to hearing and speaking, and you take it out to the public, if I take it back to my friends from school, they're going to zone out in the first 30 seconds, because this makes no sense to them. So if we want to make change, we have to change the way we speak. We've all said it is about narrative building. So if we're building a narrative, we need to build a narrative where we're all understanding the narrative. Because if we're only understanding the narrative in our bubble, we're not really changing anything outside of that bubble. So that is one side of the things. We've also spoken about de-risking finance. I'd like to contradict a little bit, and I feel like we need to take risks. We need to be able to take the risk and trust organizations that are working on the ground. Trust smaller, younger, youth-led, women-led, indigenous people-led organizations so that the finance does flow down to them. The current, whether it is the sort of systems, whether it is the systems, the ecosystem for change, it is very hard for smaller, younger organizations to access the kind of finance and resources and capacities that they need to be able to drive change. And they are the ones that are on the ground working with most vulnerable communities, sometimes being part of these vulnerable communities, driving change bottom up. So while there is, of course, flow of finance, not to deny that there isn't, I feel like there is still a large gap that exists. And this is the gap we need to start talking about more and need to start addressing more. So can we make systemic changes in ways that the most vulnerable can access the finance and at the same time can understand the nuances, the languages, the jargons, the technical terms to be able to then talk in those languages, to talk in that term, to be able to reach the stakeholders that hold the purse strings. So finance is complicated. Finance is not easy, and we've all known that. And a lot of the times we say, finance is for the experts. If you walk into climate finance negotiations at the COP, you will see very few youth in the rooms, because it is not meant to be a space for young people. It is meant to be a space for technical expertise, for people who've been here for multiple years. And this is what I think is changing. I was part of leading an organization. I've co-founded an organization called the Youth Negotiators Academy, which I've stepped down of recently. And we've trained negotiators, young negotiators between the ages of 18 to 35 as part of their national delegations. Most of them, this year at the COP, were in the NCQG negotiations, and they were part of the 300 billion goal that we've achieved. Most of them from the global south. Very few from that were from the global north, but the collaboration that has come across in these countries amongst the negotiators. And this has only happened because there was a group of 4 young women who said, okay, this is a gap we see and this is what we're going to address. And because we then had support to be able to address those gaps in a small span of 3 years. We've only been around for 3 years now, and we've worked with 64 different countries. We've worked with about 400 young people that have been trained and were at the COP last year in Baku. So I think when we say that change has to come in numbers, it will come in numbers, but it will only come when there is trust, when there is belief, and when there is a systemic change for that sort of movement to be built and the support system to be built. So I'll stop here. Thank you all for being here.
Heeta, absolutely wonderful. Am I glad that the young people stepped up to it? At Baku, I'll tell you this story. At Baku, which was soon after the November elections across the Atlantic Ocean, I met a lady, senior person in the World Bank, but who lives in Florida. And I couldn't help ask her the question that you are at Baku, how did you vote? She looked at me, smiled, and she said, look, I voted the right way, but I just want to tell you the vast majority didn't. And I asked her why, and she said, because you haven't been able to do exactly what Heeta said. Make them involved, make people involved. You want young people involved, I don't know which way we are going, but I completely agree with you. You have greater amounts at stake than we have. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we want to finish at 1:30. It's 1:40. And standing between all of you and your lunch, I'm not sure that's such a great idea. I don't know what the organizers have to say. Can we go on for another 10 minutes or we shouldn't? I think you're saying we should go for lunch. Is that what you're saying? Ladies and gentlemen, you are being spared questions. What else can I say to you? I had lovely colleagues here, Mr. Rashmi, who's a partner of mine, former secretary in the Ministry of Environment, now a distinguished fellow at TERI, whose next session will be on with the ministers participating and talking about this. I would have certainly asked him to say something very knowledgeable. We have Preeti Bhandari here, ex-UN FCCC. She has always lots of questions to ask about what we are doing and what we are not doing. And I'm sure there are many others here amongst all of you. Sir, you have a question? I'm happy because you're sitting in the second row. So we'll give you one shot. For everyone else, it'll be lunch soon thereafter. Yes, sir.
Thank you so much, and Dr. Ramesh, from the President of Institution of Green Engineers, and the Professor at Dr. MGR University. So rightly, the climate, we had implemented a simple concept to change the attitude of the residents. By implementing this simple 9 mantra, we can save 1 unit per day at home. Through 35 energy saving club at engineering college in India, last 4 years we are doing these activities, and very super it is reaching to the public to change the attitude. The concept is simple 9 mantra can save 1 unit per day at home, which can save 1.3 kilogram carbon dioxide, which will be equivalent to save 720 liter water. I need a very support from all guys here to take it forward, a small initiative.
Thank you very much, sir. All past your elbows. Of course, individuals matter. There's no issue. If you won't consume sustainably, only sustainable production is not going to help. If you won't be believers in this, nothing of this is going to happen. But you need to take the power in your own hands so that you also push those who can make policies. Because at the end of the day, we are really talking about things which are major, which are global, and which are about the way we've run lives and the way our grandparents' lives have been run and things have been taken forward. Thank you very much to all of you, Your Excellency, Madam Deputy Director General, all my friends there, Manish, you in particular, Sujata. To have 2 TERIites here, that's absolutely great. Bloomberg, thank you for always supporting us. And the businesses, most important. Thank you very much to all of you. Enjoy your lunch. After that, there's a heavyweight discussion with the ministers on here. So Rajni, all power to your elbow thereafter. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. What a fantastic panel and a great moderator, I must say. A big thank you to everyone for joining us today. We'll be serving the lunch at the hub area, so we can kindly join us for the lunch at the hub area, please. And before you go, if you're posting about WSDS, don't forget to tag us and use the official hashtags to help amplify the conversation. Thank you once again and enjoy the rest of the WSDS.